Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, Amazon, and all things books. Whoops, that's not the way it works. I would have thought I'd memorized that, but it's the Friday podcast all about your Kindle, Amazon. It's the Friday podcast all about your Kindle, Amazon. Wow, you'd think I'd have that memorized by now. I think you know what this podcast is about. Today is May 24th, 2019. And I am in an experimental mode these days, and what I have in front of me is 20 minutes until we're supposed to have supper with Tom and Tish, our friends from Casper. I've got the interview all done. I had to redo my part of it because of technical difficulties that you'll hear about, and I have a couple of other things that I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to jump in and get the things that I want to tell you about down. I don't think we'll have any music. It's kind of a bare bones experiment to see if I can get the audio done before supper, and then I'll be putting it up on the internet afterward. First up in news, there's an article that I read in The Economist dated May 11th, 2019, titled "How Creepy is Your Smart Speaker?" The Economist does not have bylines, and this kind of article is called a leader. It's a short, pithy, opinionated piece on a topic, and as a subscriber to The Economist, I've come to really value these things. So when I saw this a couple of weeks ago, I saved it, and I read it very carefully today a couple of times as I was preparing the show. The topic is basically how, as it says, how afraid should we be of the ability of Alexa and other smart speakers to listen to what we're doing? And it starts out with something which I haven't actually tried, and I'm going to see if we can do it right now to give you an answer. We're going to have her answer a question here. I'm using Alexa on my iPhone. Alexa, are you recording everything you hear?
I only record and send audio back to the Amazon cloud when you push the button to talk to me. For more information, visit the Alexa privacy section of your Alexa app.
And then they did the same thing with Siri. Let's try that. Siri, are you recording everything you hear?
I respect your privacy and only listen when you're talking to me. You can learn about Apple's approach to privacy on apple.com.
And here's what the third major voice assistant has to say about that question. Hey, Google, are you recording everything you hear?
Your device listens for a hot word, like OK Google. After it hears the hot word, it sends a recording of what you say to Google.
The Economist writers, in addressing this topic, note that in 2018, global sales of smart speakers doubled to 86.2 million. And so it's clearly a phenomenon that is growing really fast. And with it, there is the question about how worried we should be that our speaker is spying on us. I like the way the Economist frames things, pointing out that with any technology which is advanced to the point of feeling like it's magical, myths grow up around it. So they engage in a little myth busting, saying despite their name, the devices, smart speakers, are simple-minded. They record only sound clips after the wake word. And they store, in Amazon's case, they've said that they store some of these recorded words in order to improve the ability of Alexa to understand the questions. And that if we want to, we can delete everything that is being stored so there's nothing of our voice in the cloud. That's a little bit cumbersome to do. You can mute the speaker if you want to. And if you are not saying Alexa in your conversation, then your speaker isn't going to be recording. Now, there was one incident, and it got a lot of publicity, where perhaps not using Alexa as the wake word, it might have been the more common word computer or even Amazon, and someone had generated a message to somebody else which made it look like this party had been recorded. Chances of that are pretty remote. So the bottom line in kind of the concerns you hear about from The Economist, and this is a group of people writing this article, is, some of these really scary things that you're hearing about what Alexa can do, they just don't match up with the way the device works. Now, they also don't totally dismiss fears that people have. Well, okay, fine. If it all works the way it's supposed to, great. But what about hackers? What about government snooping? What about Amazon secretly collecting information so that they can sell us more stuff? I like how they go from there to say, okay, these are reasonable fears, but if you really are afraid of these kinds of things, you should be terrified of your smartphone, because your smartphone not only could be hacked to record what you're saying, you always have it with you. It has GPS information to show where you are. It has motion data, so it could say what speed you're going. And compared to all of that, Alexa is just sitting there gathering only the words after the wake word. Spy agencies have been said to be able to activate microphones on smartphones, so there's risk there. That made sense to me, and it made me wonder, well, how come we hear more concern, kind of conspiracy theories or myths about Alexa than we do about our smartphones? Because I think the Economist is right that there's a lot more exposure to misuse of it. I think probably one reason is that we are so used to the smartphones after all this time, and that they've become so indispensable that if you have some concerns about what could be done through your smartphone, you have to weigh that against all the things you're doing. You're putting your calendar on it, you're texting, it's become this necessary device for modern living. And Alexa can tell you what the weather is, and most of us are using Alexa in a much less essential way than we're using our smartphones. The Economist goes on to look ahead to the future of these devices, saying the tech firms are going to be expanding into finance, entertainment. Some of them that aren't in shopping, Amazon clearly is, are going to be expanding into shopping. So there might be incentives as they get into more of these areas to use the hardware to snoop and to misuse data. But a countervailing pressure would be that a competing tech company that's getting into these areas could have a competitive advantage by convincing people that they are the most privacy-friendly of the companies, that if you do have concerns, they're the one to go with. The Economist says that customers should be able to choose how to balance convenience and privacy, and that makes sense, although I think most of us, we can choose to dial it down toward more privacy, but it's generally just not worth the work. One idea I was thinking of is on the Tesla, I can choose a chill, insane, or ludicrous mode, which describes the different kinds of acceleration. And I could picture in the future maybe these devices, and if you were to go into your settings on Alexa and you had sort of generally described levels of concern. If you want to go all the way to not having this device capture anything, you could choose the paranoid setting, and even after the wake word, nothing would be saved in the cloud. Or on the other end, it might say, I have nothing to hide setting. So record me, use my recordings to help respond to me better. And each of us would then be able to sort of choose where we're going to be on that spectrum without having to get into all the technical details of what we want in those settings. In my case, I think I would be pretty close to the I have nothing to hide. As an example, it's come out that after we ask a question after the wake word, Amazon is saving those wake word questions as a way to improve the responsiveness of Alexa. And I think that's great. I think that I want Alexa to be more responsive. And I think that probably if Alexa, if humans are going over responses to questions and then improving the technology's ability to understand. And so over time, people just experience, if they try different platforms, when I talk to Alexa, she 99% of the time understands what I'm saying. When I ask Siri to play music on my HomePod, or I ask Google Home, it just seems dumber. It just doesn't seem to respond. And that's the kind of improvement in the platform that might flow from using some of this stored data in a way that you'd have to trust that it's not being misused. But in my mind, I think it's something that would benefit for me. The Economist ends this leader by saying the tech giants need to do more to convince users that Alexa and her friends can be trusted. And I think that's true. It's, whenever Amazon has talked about this, they try to make it clear what the risks are and to bust some of those myths. I think the other thing that's liable to keep people comfortable with them is if the platform becomes as indispensable as the smartphone, we're going to make that trade-off about privacy and the possible misuse of it. Generally, we're going to say, yeah, I understand there's risk to this and other modern conveniences that I'm using, like the smartphone, like my car, but these things make my life so much easier and in some cases more fun that I'm willing to live with it, especially if I can set the dial to whatever level of privacy makes sense to me. The second news story I want to talk to you about is Alexa Guard. This was, I think it was announced about a week ago. There's an article about it in Fortune by Emily Price. And this is a new capability of Alexa devices which you can set up from settings on the app on your smartphone. And you'll see something that's called Alexa Guard. And the idea is that if you change your Alexa to this setting, you can, when you leave the house, you can say, Alexa, I'm leaving, and then at that point there'll be a white ring that goes around your regular Echo device, and I'm not sure what the designation of it is going to be on the Echo Show. And while you're away, you have various levels of Alexa Guard that you can set. One will detect the sound of breaking glass, that if somebody is breaking into your home and they choose a window, that the Alexa device, in addition to listening for the wake word, will now listen for the sound of breaking glass. And if it detects it, it will send a message to your smartphone. I'm not sure what that message would look like. This is the kind of thing that'd be a little hard to test. If you'd have to go through breaking some glass to find out what kind of a message it's going to send to your phone. But the idea is that it would be able to send something to your phone, and you'd immediately know that something was going wrong. At that point, if you have drop-in set up on your devices, you could drop in and your Alexa would be listening to everything that's happening. You could say, hey, who's in there? What are you doing? You could try to scare somebody away, even if you were 2,000 miles away in Denver and this was happening at your home in Cambridge. The other setting that you can do is will connect with security systems like Ring and ADT. I think the idea there is that if the alarm goes off, the Alexa will notify you via the app that there's some kind of an incident going on. And then there's also a setting that will detect alarm sounds for smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. There's another one that is called Away Lighting, and that uses machine learning to duplicate how your lights might be turning on and off, and it's keyed to a zip code. So in other words, it knows what time zone you're in, and if you have a light that's on the system, as it gets to be dark, the light would turn on, and then as it comes on in the morning, it would turn off. So it would be sort of a simulated lighting pattern to if someone was in the house as opposed to away from the house. I think this is a nice addition to the value of Alexa. As I've talked about before, most of us are using Alexa for very rudimentary things or become part of the life, finding out about the weather. This is one that I can imagine actually being useful if we got used to it. And the command is so simple that as you leave the house, if you just say, Alexa, I'm leaving, and then you'd have sort of this imagined sense of security. Well, good old Alexa, she's going to be listening for breaking glass and alarms going off, and my house isn't going to be completely alone because Alexa's going to be looking out for me. And then when you come in, you say, Alexa, I'm home. I was trying this at lunch with Tom and Tish today, and I set the Alexa Guard settings on my phone at the restaurant here in Denver. And when I came home, the two devices, the Echo and the Echo Dot, had a white ring that was going around. And if it's another color ring, it means that there's a package. But I tried saying, what are my notifications? And nothing worked. So I had to Google it to find out that was the indication that the system had been put into away mode as opposed to home mode. So Alexa Guard, that's something new that Alexa can do that might actually be kind of useful. For the tech tip, I'm a little out of sequence because you'll hear that in the interview, Tracy talks about something called Reading Insights, which is on Kindle for iOS, and I say that I'm going to talk about that on the tech tip. So you're hearing about it first here, and then it'll be talked about again in the interview. What this is that if you have the Kindle app on your iPhone or your iPad, anything in the iOS family, if you go to you tap on the Kindle app, and then you tap on down at the bottom, it says Library Community, the book that you read last, Discover, and then there's More. If you tap on More, then you'll see several things, Sync, Listen with Audible, and one of them is Reading Insights. And if you tap on that, some pretty interesting information becomes available. It starts out with a Streaks activity tracker, and this is it's looking at how many days in a row have I been reading. And in my case, not surprising, it's 43 weeks in a row, an unbroken streak, and my longest days in a row is 11. Beyond that, it shows a calendar which shows days that I have been reading. And I can go, it's showing me May 19th. I've been reading pretty steadily most of May. And I can also go back to April 19th, March 19th, and actually see when I was reading on my Kindles for any particular day. It goes back to August 1st, 2018. Then there are record streaks, the longest streak since 2018. Mine is, I'm currently in it, 43 weeks in a row. Then there's Did You Know? You can access this. Oh, okay. It's just reminding you that if you want to see this information, you get to it from the Kindle app. There are some more information. Days read per month. 27 days read in April. So far, 22 in May, same as last month. There is a further, I'm scrolling down now in the app, beyond the streak, and this is, I think they change this fairly regularly. This is a different one than I saw the other day. I'm a little over my target here. I hope I'm not delaying supper. 6 o'clock. So beyond the streak, it says reading is a simple way to improve vocabulary. Based on a study done by Scholastic, quote, children who acquire a substantial vocabulary are often able to think more deeply, express themselves better, and learn new things more quickly. And this same holds true for adults. A substantial vocabulary can encourage outside-the-box thinking and improve an adult's ability to process information, leading to both professional and personal success. So this is kind of cheerleading for reading and books. The ones I've seen so far are pretty good. There's an area here where you can give feedback on this Reading Insights feature. And then if you don't like the idea of Amazon or anyone else tracking your reading, this kind of goes on with what we've talked about before on the privacy. It says don't want Reading Insights, and there's a button that says remove dashboard, and this feature will just disappear from your device. This is only available now on the iOS Kindle app, and I suspect that they're experimenting with it. They probably really are seeing what people send feedback on it, and if they think that it's something that customers are going to respond to positively, I wouldn't be surprised to see it expanded, at least to the Kindle Fire, where maybe there's a more of an ability to track than on the e-ink devices, or if it's something that people just love, it'll probably show up on all of our devices. Another incremental improvement in the Kindle platform. Tracy Schultz is a 2003 graduate of Brown University with a dual degree, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Sciences and a Bachelor of Arts in Visual Art with a focus in photography. She worked at Microsoft for 7 years and joined Amazon in November of 2010 as Senior Product Manager for the Fire Tablet. Since March of 2015, she has been Head of Product for Kindle Reading. I connect with Tracy on Tuesday, May 21st by Skype to her office in Seattle. Although this was the 564th interview I've done for the podcast, I made a rookie error in setting up my audio equipment for it. What happened was I had my Yeti microphone here in front of me. That's the beautiful microphone that does really nice audio on my end of interviews, but I had not switched the Skype input so that I was actually recording with a microphone built into my MacBook Pro. The result was not only bad audio, but there was some kind of really irritating hum throughout my side of the conversation. I thought maybe I could get by with it, so in the editing of it yesterday, I didn't fix it other than to just try to tweak it with the controls in Logic Pro as best I could. I woke up this morning knowing that's not going to work. So we have a new experiment here, which I think is perhaps going to be a little instructive. I'm always learning about interviews. I am going to re-record my questions, and they're going to be the same questions. There's not going to be any changes of the setup leading into Tracy's answers. But one thing I've noticed in just listening to the bad audio is these questions are too long. I was so excited to talk about Tracy, and you'll see why as we get into this conversation. And also, there were some personal connections. She graduated from Brown. My daughter graduated from Brown. And I just lost my discipline of asking really precise questions, having my guest be the one who's mainly speaking. That's the normal setup for my interviews. And because of the audio problem, I'm going to have a chance to go in and ask the questions as they should have been asked the first time. But I don't know if you'd be able to tell that there's any difference in the timing of when the questions were asked and the answers, but full disclosure, that's what you hear. I'll also, I think, use this opportunity to interject a couple of responses or feedback to specific answers of her questions. So with that, the first question which I asked her was simply, what are her responsibilities currently at Amazon?
As you said, I'm head of product for Kindle reading, which means my team and I are responsible for the Kindle reading experience on our e-reader devices, as well as Fire tablets, the Kindle app for iOS, Android, Mac, PC, Windows, and Alexa. And so a big part of the job is sort of figuring out what we're going to build next. And we do that in large part by listening to our readers and then working with design and engineering to take those ideas from conception all the way to launch.
In the original recording, I commented to Tracy that I thought it was wonderful to hear that someone has her job. And the reason is that on a couple of occasions, at least when I've been at briefings for new products by Amazon executives, I have pointed out the differences in the interface, for example, between an e-reader like an Oasis and a Fire tablet or an iOS device. And I've always just assumed that those were errors or mistakes or things that Amazon should fix, and that they related to the fact that there are kind of silos across the different devices. There is maybe a Kindle team and then there's a Fire team, and they don't talk to each other, so they do highlighting differently, and they have some of these different differences in the interface. So when she talked about her job, it immediately became clear to me that there really is a logical reason to have differences among devices. As she says, reading on a Fire is different than reading on a Kindle, and so they are making an effort, represented by the job that she has, to be responsible for the reading interface across devices to balance the obvious need for uniformity. They realize that for somebody who's reading a Kindle book, the best thing is if they don't have to say, oh, it's different on this device, but also to use to the fullest advantage each of these devices. So that may have been where the interview got off track, because I didn't know that was her job from the title and in preparing for it. So all of a sudden I was confronted with an answer to a question that's been kind of bugging me for years about the differences between the devices. After I explained that background to her, it gave her a chance to agree that it is an important role that she has, and she talked a little bit further about it.
Absolutely. It's something, we think about constantly. And sort of the guiding principle is always to make sure that it feels consistent for customers that read on 2 or more devices, but then that the experience also feels native to whatever device they're using. And so iOS has patterns, Android has patterns, e-reader has patterns, and we think about all of those and balance them.
The next question I asked Tracy was about her undergraduate degree at Brown, and I wondered which of the degrees was most useful to her in her current work at Amazon, the BS in computer science or the BA in visual arts.
I love this question. And I think it's more obvious to people why a degree in computer science is useful when in a role that's focused on building apps and software. But what I'm really passionate about is building software, building experiences that are easy for people to use and delightful in their simplicity. And that's all about great design. And so I actually think the two complement each other really well. I can't pick one. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I work really closely with both our engineering and our design teams. And so it's helpful to speak both languages.
I'll comment here that when Tracy said, I love that question, I've made somewhat of a game of interviewing over the years, and there's lots of metrics that I use to grade myself on how well I'm doing. But whenever a guest says, oh, good question, or in this case, I love that question, it just makes me happy, because my goal in preparing for an interview is always to find things that make a guest think, make a guest just enjoy the process of coming up with an answer. And this is particularly the case when I interview people who have done lots of interviews. So this one has already rung that bell, and I was well into enjoying the conversation with her. Even if she hadn't said she loved the question, I just was so eager to hear what kinds of things she could tell us about the Kindle from such a unique perspective, being responsible for the interface across devices. By the way, and this will be an aside for Jessica, who helped set up the interview from the Public Relations Department. One thing that really doesn't work is sometimes I know a guest has been trained to say, good question, Len, good question, Len. And I think that the limit for that should be about one time per interview, and it really needs to be an authentic reaction, because I can tell when somebody's just saying that to, I don't know, ingratiate themselves or be too kind to the interviewer. When it just comes naturally from the quality of the question, that's the right time to say so. The next question that I asked Tracy was, which aspects of the Kindle interface are most popular with customers? Now, I'll say here that this interview was unusual in another respect, in that I wanted to have kind of a working session about what the Kindle does, and I had worked with Jessica and Tracy to actually plan how we were going to talk about it. And they were very helpful and came back with a better way of organizing it than the first one that I submitted to them. And so with these categories that we're going to be moving through now come from that collaborative approach that we did to planning how we were going to talk about it. So here's Tracy telling us what are the most popular features of the Kindle.
Kindle offers an incredible digital reading experience, and I think that's through the combination of great selection, having the books that people want to read, having the best dedicated digital reading devices, and then also through the free Kindle apps that let you read on any device. But when I think about features, I probably point to four things. And so the first one would be the ability to read anytime, anywhere. And so, when you're using Kindle, when you're reading or listening, Kindle's going to save your place and then sync that to all your devices. So you can start off your morning listening to an Audible book on your Alexa, and then get on the bus and pull out your phone and keep reading on your phone, and then get home in the evening and continue the story on your e-reader device. And on all of those devices, you have access to your full Kindle library. So that's great portability. The second thing I'd point to is the ability to customize your reading experience. And, as many readers as there are preferences for how they want their book to look. And that's why we let Kindle readers customize their font size, select their font, select boldness level, margins, spacing, alignment. And now with the reading themes on our Kindle e-readers, you can save all those preferences into a custom theme and then easily switch between them. The third thing I'd mention is the features that let you get more out of a book. And so that's things like dictionary and X-ray, where you can press and hold on any word to see the full dictionary definition. And that's a feature, when I'm reading in the browser and it's not the Kindle app, I frequently am like, where's the dictionary? And then X-ray is great for characters and places in books. And so, maybe there's a character that hasn't been around for a couple of chapters and you've kind of forgotten who they are. I couldn't have gotten through Game of Thrones without it. And then the last one, I think, again, goes back to selection. But I think it's about being able to get the book you want anytime, anywhere. And so one of my favorite Kindle stories, and this predates my time working on Kindle, is being in a tent in Tanzania, and I finished book 2 of the Hunger Games, and I just had to know what happened next. And so, I got the 3G going, I bought the third book, and I just kept reading. And then there's also Kindle Unlimited, where, subscribers have access to millions of titles titles and thousands of audiobooks for unlimited access. So I think all of those are the things that customers love most about Kindle.
My follow-up to that question was to ask Tracy for an example of how someone might use different reading themes on their Kindle device.
Yeah, so I'll use my own personal example, which is, I like to read with a pretty compact reading experience. I like to get as many words on the page as I can. And so I take the font size down, I reduce the margins. But then when I'm at the gym and I'm on an exercise, bike or treadmill, I need a little larger font to be able to keep my place. Same thing, later at night, my eyes start to get tired. And so at the moment I have Tracy's theme and I have Tracy's large theme. And I switch back and forth between them sort of daily.
Are reading themes available on all Kindle reading devices?
The reading themes are currently only available on e-reader. So they'd be on, the Oasis and the Paperwhite and the Kindle, but they're local to the device. So you do have to set them up on each device.
Next category is lesser known capabilities of what your Kindle can do, sort of what a power user might be doing that you're not doing yet, things to try.
So I'll talk about 5 things, 4 of which were actually released in the last year. And so the first one is sort of our most recent launch, which is the Mark as Read feature. And this just came out last month, and it was the most requested feature by Kindle readers. And so what it does is it lets you filter your Kindle library to see just the books you've read or the books you haven't, your unread books. And I personally now live with the unread filter on. When I go into Kindle library, I want to see the books I'm reading, the books I want to read, things that people have recommended to me. And it's a great focusing filter. And you don't have to do anything to set it up. When you finish a book, it's automatically marked as read. But if you want to change the status manually, you can also tap and hold on a book in the library and then mark it as read or mark it as unread. The second one I was going to talk about, is reading themes, which I think we've touched on a bit already. But again, I think that's a great time savings to be able to change a bunch of settings with 2 taps. And then the next one, which is also e-reader specific, is invert black and white. And this is actually an accessibility option, but I think it's broadly applicable. And so what it lets you do is read with a black background and white text, which is really great in low light scenarios. If it's nighttime, you've got the lights out, maybe you're trying not to wake up the person next to you. You go and turn on invert black and white by going to settings, accessibility options, and then you'll get the black experience with the white text. And then the next one I really like is Reading Insights, which is currently only available in the Kindle for iOS app. But it lets you know a lot more about your reading habits. So you will get to it by going to the More tab and then Reading Insights. And what you'll see there is how many days in a row you've read, the longest streak of reading you've had, how many days you read last month, books you completed last year, and it's just going to get better over time.
I'm going to talk more about Reading Insights on the Kindle for iOS app under the Tech Tip. I had seen it, I think, but I hadn't really played around with it, and it's pretty remarkable. I think you'll enjoy hearing about the types of things you can learn about your reading if you are on an iOS app with an iPhone or an iPad, and we'll talk about that at the Tech Tip. I was thinking about my wife, Darlene, for this next question because sometimes she'll be reading on her Oasis. She uses the first generation Oasis. She loses her place, so she'll hit a button wrong, and all of a sudden she's somewhere in the book that she didn't know how to get to or from. And I asked Tracy, what are some tools on the Kindle platform that helps you if you lose your place?
So Kindle has two features they're really great for being able to flip around in a book. And so the first one is page flip, which was designed based on the way we know customers read print books, where you stick a finger in here and you stick a finger in there and you flip between them. And so page flip makes it really easy to flip back to a photo in a memoir or a map in a fantasy novel. And you can know that with the page pin, it will always save your place and make it really easy to get back to the place that you left off. And then the second one is called Bird's Eye View, which gives you a zoomed out view of the book and pixel accurate thumbnails of all the different pages. And so using Bird's Eye View, it's easy to pick out notable pages, whether it's the start of a chapter or a large table or an inset quote, and to jump to those. And again, you can count on it to save your place and make it easy to get back to where you were.
The next question is, what kinds of misconceptions do you think people have who are not using a Kindle yet, who are thinking about it and feeling some resistance to making the change?
I think the biggest misconception is probably that it's all or nothing. One of the things that we know from our readers is that lots of people read in multiple formats. Some people really love Audible books for, when they're commuting or for when they want to be hands-free and maybe they're doing things around the house. They prefer Kindle for sort of moments of sanctuary where they're really focused on reading. And then also there are people that have sort of preferences based on genre. There's some books they absolutely want to have on Kindle, and there's some books they absolutely want to have on print. And so the thing I would say to someone who's thinking about it is, I would say, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can have some things in Audible, some things in Kindle, and some things in print, and you should, figure out how it all works for you.
This answer by Tracy generated an aha moment for me that helped me to understand the trajectory of how I've talked about the Kindle over the past 10 years, ever since starting the podcast. And I realized that as we started this, the level of enthusiasm for the ebook and the sense that this was a whole new technology that was going to revolutionize reading, I think I see in retrospect that I was taking kind of a maximalist view of the Kindle, and that I was seeing it as either or, that I kind of proudly shifted from reading 100% on Kindle. And I can remember a friend of mine, Kes Woodward in Alaska, had challenged me by sending me or recommending a book to read on paper just to see what my experience of doing it would be. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I think I determined that, okay, I've done it. And now I've proven to myself that I really do prefer reading on books. So there was this sort of purist attitude. It flowed from my genuine enthusiasm for it. I'm not sort of beating myself over it. But as soon as I heard, one of Amazon's key Kindle employees saying, it's not all or nothing. Try this. If you might find that some of your reading goes better this way, and if you have other reading that you do on books, it's totally all right. This matches the reality of how I often hear people talk. When you'll notice that sometimes when I'm talking to someone, I'll just say, hey, how are you reading? Are you reading on paper and Kindle? And different people will say, when I travel, I love the Kindle. I love the convenience, but I really prefer paper books. And this, to my credit, this is not irritating me anymore. I'm just saying, I think that's right. We just have a mix. But to have this shift toward recognizing that the Kindle is now just one option in reading. It's not for every person, and for readers who love to read, it's not the way they do 100% of their reading. I'm probably still close to 99% of my reading. The only book that I'm reading lately on paper is Austin Kleon's Keep Going, and that's just because when I pick it up, I'm ready to be inspired. I'm reading a few pages. I have it on Kindle, but I don't get quite the impact of it when I'm reading on my Kindle versus reading on paper. So this question and answer with Tracy, I think I was tending toward this understanding, but she really helped me to see it, and it's now going to inform my feelings about whether or not Kindle is all or nothing. I think sometimes when I find myself saying, well, how are you reading? Are you reading on a Kindle? I can imagine a time when my conversations with people about reading and technology and all the things that have flowed from my initial interest in the Kindle just might not be so much part of what we talk about here. It's sort of like asking somebody, well, what toothpaste are you using, or what's something about your ordinary life that you can tell us about as it comes mainstream into just the way people read, or as one option for the way people read. It's maybe not such an interesting topic anymore. So I don't know. I don't want to go too far in the other direction here, because a little bit of evangelism is always going to be part of a show named the Kindle Chronicles. But that was a very helpful answer that Tracy had to that question. Next thing I wanted to ask her about was the change in highlighting, which I've noticed on the Kindle e-reader. And I had a question. Why did they do this? Why did they make it so that when you're starting a highlight on your Oasis or your other Kindle device, instead of the highlight being formed as your finger moves across the page, it's it's a simple underline, and then when you're finished and you tap on the page, the highlight appears. Well, Tracy had a very interesting answer to that question.
So it only changed on e-reader. It still works exactly the same. So you still press and hold and drag to select the text you want to highlight. The two differences, as you mentioned, are the underline and then the highlight appears when you pick your finger up. But then the other thing you should notice is that it's smoother, faster, and more accurate. And that's really the reason for the change, that, on a technical level, drawing the underline instead of refreshing the text to show the highlight with the inverted text allowed us to make it easier to select exactly what you want to select.
I want to point out something I think is significant about this particular improvement in the Kindle interface. Here we are more than 10 years after the introduction of the Kindle. And as I've said, it's kind of a mainstream device. And for Amazon to invest what I'm sure it took in engineering and software development, all of the different aspects of it, to come up with a way for a highlight on an e-reader to be noticeably, but not dramatically faster and smoother than the way of doing it before, it affirms the sense that there is never going to be a point when they aren't trying to improve this device. And this kind of improvement happens as Amazon is making big innovations like the Alexa. And we're going to hear next week from someone who is helping people to understand how do you have an innovation culture that enables these huge advances in the midst of many failures. Amazon is clearly doing that. That's something Jeff Bezos talks about. But meanwhile, down in the trenches, in the Kindle team, there's people saying, this highlighting thing, I wonder if we can make it a little faster, or a little smoother, and a little more accurate. So they did. I think this is one answer to a question sometimes I've had. If 5 years ago or whenever it was, I can remember when Barnes & Noble brought out the Nook, and there were some pretty nifty things about the Nook that I can't even remember. I thought, boy, the Nook is coming. I've got this podcast called the Kindle Chronicles, and that's when I created another podcast called The Reading Edge, just in case the Nook was the victor in the battle of the e-readers. Well, the Nook is just barely alive and probably heading off the stage here. The Kobo is quite a bit more successful internationally, but it doesn't have anywhere near the market share of the Kindle. You might say that's because Amazon's big and all these resources, but I think it's the result of this kind of granular improvement in the platform. This is just one small example, and people who have used the product and see the benefits of it, we may not be aware of all of these little changes, but in the overall experience of it, they definitely pay off in having it just always seem like a really terrific way to read. The next question I had was about firmware updates. Of course, that's where these changes come about. And I told Tracy, I have a friend in Casper, Jack, who's 92, and he's a big Kindle reader. I got him a Paperwhite recently, and he's always been a bit mystified as to this process of updating the firmware. And he thought that he should not turn his Paperwhite Wi-Fi on unless he was waiting for firmware to show up. And I said, Jack, you can leave it on all the time. It's not costing you anything to have your home Wi-Fi network connected to your Kindle, and that's how the devices will receive any updates that come along. So I asked Tracy just to give us a little more information about that firmware update process.
So the reason you want to have the latest firmware is obviously to have the latest features. You shouldn't have to worry about it. So Kindle firmware updates are pushed automatically to devices over the air. They do roll out. So you are correct that not everyone gets them at the same moment. And your advice to your friend is absolutely accurate, that the thing you need to do to make sure you're getting the latest update is connect the device to Wi-Fi, make sure it's charged or put it on the charger, and then it'll update itself at a time when it's idle. So if you put it on the charger, get it connected and leave it overnight, it should update. And so if you ever want to check your firmware version, you can always do that by going to Settings, Device Options, and then selecting Device Info. And you get a dialog there that has your firmware version. And so at the moment, the latest firmware version is 5.11.1 or 5.11.1.1, depending on your Kindle model. And then the other great thing in that dialog is there's a link that says what's new, and you can tap on that and you'll get a text description of the features that were included in the latest updates.
If someone doesn't have Wi-Fi available, will a firmware update come over 3G?
No, firmware does not update over 3G. so it does need a Wi-Fi connection.
What can you tell us about dictionaries on the Kindle?
Kindle includes 47 free dictionaries in 16 languages. And so as we talked about before, to use dictionary, you long press on any word, and then the info card will come up, which will show you the dictionary definition. From that info card experience, you can also switch the dictionary. Depending on what device you're reading on, you'll either see the name of the dictionary or the language, and you tap on that and then select the dictionary you want to use. It's really personal preference, but the most popular English dictionary is New Oxford American Dictionary, which is the default. But then also, we know some people really are passionate about their favorite dictionary. And so Kindle also includes a feature called Bring Your Own Dictionary, where you can buy any compatible dictionary from the Kindle store and then make that your default.
And how about translation?
Kindle supports translation into 23 languages using Microsoft Translator. And the workflow is very similar to the dictionary workflow. So you select the text you want to translate. You can select anywhere from a word to up to about a page, and then press and hold to bring up the info card display. And the translation experience, you'll have to swipe over to find it. Basically, the Kindle will auto-detect the language of the text you selected. So all you have to do is select your target language. And then once you've done that, it saves that for the next time. So you really usually only have to do that once or once per book. And so, I like to use it for, books that I read that maybe have short passages in Spanish or French where my Spanish is not non-existent, but definitely rusty. And so, I like to check, am I reading this correctly? And also sort of make sure that I'm really understanding what the author said.
In your own reading, do you use a stylus or your finger when you're tapping on words or highlighting?
I always use my finger. With the latest e-readers, you can use a passive stylus, but I've always found the finger to work just fine. Anything else? If I had one tip for your readers, it would probably be, if you love reading on your Kindle e-reader, go install the app on your phone. That the experience of having Kindle on multiple devices and being able to pick up your book in line or at the doctor's office or just in moments of downtime is one of my favorite things that I would love everyone to try. Well, I'm glad that I went through the time to re-record my side of the interview because it certainly is a lot easier to listen to than if I had gone with the original track. It also gave me a chance to do kind of an extended, annotated interview. I have been tempted in the past to drop in comments as I do the voiceover for the show. This is much more of an annotation or commenting on the interview as it plays out. I've thought that this would be interesting, and in some cases it gives me a good platform to have a back and forth or think about the interview after I've had it. I'm not sure that's fair to the guest because I think anybody that agrees to do an interview would certainly expect the interview to be recorded and played back pretty closely to the way it was done. I sometimes snip out ums and ahs and tighten things up a little, but I hope in this case that Tracy and Jessica are happy with how it turned out and that you found it useful as well. If you've got ideas or thoughts on the annotated interview or any other ways to experiment with what we're doing here, I'm in quite an experimental mood these days. I had a great conversation with Mark Isero. We were sort of talking shop about our podcasts, and he was encouraging me to continue experimenting, and as I did to him for his highlighter newsletter and podcast, which is really excellent. If you have feedback, please email me at podchronicles@gmail.com. To give you a taste of how much of a different experience it would have been to have my side as originally recorded, I'll have the outro part of the interview from that original. I have been speaking with Tracy Schultz, Amazon's head of product for Kindle Reading. Thanks very much, Tracy. Thanks, Len. That's it for this week. Just a little bit over time. We got everything down and supper's coming. I think Darlene and Tish bought a chicken at Whole Foods and tasty meal ahead. Next week's guest is going to be John Rossman, and he has written a book, Think Like Amazon, 50 and a Half Ideas to Become a Digital Reader. I'm almost halfway through this book, and I'm pretty impressed with it. He was an executive at Amazon for a number of years and quite a while ago, but I think his sense of the philosophy of Jeff Bezos seems pretty current, and he applies it, obviously working with other companies,
companies, and he's made it very accessible here in this book. So I'll be talking to him next week. The week after that, I will be going to Las Vegas for the RE:Mars conference about machine learning, automation, robots, and space, presided over by Jeff Bezos. I'm very excited about that. And that's it for this week. In talking with Mark Isero, I was saying, for people who listen to our shows, we always open them up the same way and we end the same way. And some podcasts I listen to, the same exact opening goes on for a minute or two. And I can recite them by heart, although I can't recite my own intro by heart. But I thought, what if these things changed every time? Instead of saying, have a great day, bye, you say, I hope your life is going well. I hope you're reading great books. So I'll be trying out different ways to say goodbye. But in any event, this episode is over. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is Len Edgerly in Denver.